So our first panelist today is Christina Jepson, and Christina is a shareholder at Parsons, Behle, and Latimer, and a member of the firm's Employment and Labor Practice Group. She maintains a general civil litigation practice with emphasis on employment litigation and counseling, commercial and business litigation, and contracts disputes. Christina is past chair of the Employment and Labor section of the Utah State Bar and has lectured on numerous employment topics. She is recognized in Chambers USA, America's leading lawyers for business, for labor and employment law, and was also recognized in Utah Business Magazine as one of Utah's legal elite in the area of employment and labor law and super lawyers. Christina is a member of the American Bar Foundation Fellows. She is also a member of the National and Local Society for Human Resource Management and has spoken at numerous Society for Human Resource Management events. She is an adjunct professor at the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law, and she teaches litigation skills class. She also currently serves as our president of our board of trustees for the S.J. Quinney College of Law. Prior to joining Parsons, Behle, and Latimer, Christina served as a judicial law clerk to the Honorable David K. Winder, then Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Utah, and the Honorable Stephen Anderson at the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. She graduated first in her class from the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law, where she also served on the Utah Law Review and competed for the National Moot Court team. Our second panelist is Abby Dizon-Maughan, who is an associate at Burbidge Mitchell. Abby has vigorously represented clients in complex commercial cases, catastrophic personal injury litigation, and wrongful death suits, among others, and has earned recognition from super lawyers for her advocacy. Abby earned her bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Utah, her master's in business management from the University of Phoenix, and her Juris Doctorate from the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law, where she graduated with honors. While in law school, Abby served as an executive capacity for several student organizations, including the Outlaws, which is our College of Law's LGBTQ+ ally group, and she was also a founding member of the Utah Student Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Abby is actively involved in the legal community. She is the chairperson of the Professional Standards Review Board of West Valley Police Department, the chairperson of the Criminal Justice Committee of the NAACP, Salt Lake branch, and a former president of the Utah Minority Bar Association. Abby is also a member of the Women Lawyers of Utah, LGBT and Allied Lawyers of Utah, and the Salt Lake County Bar Association. Abby's commitment to social justice and civil rights has not gone unrecognized. On October 2015, she was presented with the President's Award by the NAACP Salt Lake branch. Branch President Janita Williams commended her for her activism and dedication to pursuing civil rights. In February 2017, Abby has received recognition for her mentorship of aspiring attorneys at the Breakfast of Champions, where she was named an outstanding mentor by the Utah Bar Association. She has also been named a rising star by Super Lawyers. So we are really excited to have both of these panelists with us today. So now each of the panelists is going to speak for, again, approximately 10 minutes about portions of the book that really struck them. Before I turn it over to Christina Jepsen to start us off, one thing I wanted to share that really struck me about the book is this discussion of the fact that you don't have to necessarily know your path. I think sometimes as lawyers or lawyers-to-be or women, we think that we have to have everything plotted out and we have to have everything perfectly figured out in advance, but that's certainly not the case, and the book makes that point. So for example, at page 21, the book talks about how you need to define your own success, that you are the one who defines your success. At page 46, it talks about the fact that you are the only one who can maintain your path, so you plot out your path and you maintain it. And then at page 78, the book talks about trying not to be perfect, that oftentimes perfect can be the enemy of the good, and that you need to make a decision and move on. And these are all pieces of wisdom that's certainly been true in my life. I have not had a linear path. I started practice in Washington, D.C. because I thought it would be really great to be on the coast. As much as I loved my practice, I found that I was missing out on certain elements. Saw a job posting to be able to teach at the University of Montana in environmental and Indian law, and thought that sounded like fun. And that's literally what started my career in the academy. Whereas I think a lot of people would tell you that they worked very diligently to prepare to go on the job market, and had thought about it way in advance. I did not. And I had a tendency to just make decisions based on what sounded like fun to me, going to work in DC or teaching at the University of Montana, and later teaching at subsequent universities, and of course now the University of Utah. So I thought that this was some really good advice, this idea that you don't have to have a perfect path, you don't have to do things that are perfect, you don't have to know everything you want to do, you don't have to know where you want to be in 10 years, and that's okay, that you can find your way. So you were the one who defines success, and you were the one who maintains your path, and I thought that was some really good advice. So with that, just little note about something that I found interesting about the book, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who's going to share her thoughts, and she's going to talk for about 10 minutes. Christina, take it away.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, I just realized I have a really funny admission. The book I received is called 50 Lessons for Lawyers. It doesn't say anything about women, and it's all by one author, not by different authors. So apparently I read it. It's a slightly different book than the rest of you read. And I only mention that because I'm probably going to talk about some particular chapters, and they may not match up with what you have, but you know, I'm a woman, so I can talk about lessons from women. It'll be fine. But I kind of wanted, first of all, I'm just so thrilled to be here with Dean Kronk Warner and with Abby, just two amazing women, and just thrilled to be here. And I think what the dean said about you don't need to know your path and you don't need to be perfect are really two important points. Almost every lawyer I know has started in one place and ended up somewhere very different. And I think if you're starting out, I've been doing this 25 years, and I'm in a very different place than maybe I set out to do. Some ways it's the same, some ways it's different. But you know, that's perfectly fine. I also think it's really important to have some goals about where you want to be at. But I think those goals are more about what you want your life to be. And the job part might change quite a bit. So for me, when I started practicing law at age 24, I think my goals were probably pretty different. After I had children, my main goal was how can I work and be a great lawyer and still find time to be the mother that I want to be. And I also like to travel, and I've wanted to make travel a big part of my life. So I've made the choice to not make as much money as I possibly can, but instead to find lots of time to do other things that I really enjoy, and are important to me. So I think you do need to know what your core values are as a person. But you've got to be really flexible in terms of where your career goes, because it might change because you have no choice. Like we're all working at home now, and who knows where we're headed. And it might change, you know, for other reasons that are beyond your control or in your control. You may just decide you want something different. Just one little story about myself. I mean, I really started out as a general commercial litigator. Which used to be an easier thing to do in Salt Lake. And it's much harder now to market yourself as a general commercial litigator. And I slowly became an employment lawyer, and that wasn't exactly something I planned on doing. And now I do that 100% of my time, and I really, really enjoy it. And it's different than I planned. But you just have to some extent, go with the flow, but also, you know what your core values are. In terms of don't be perfect, I completely agree with that. I'm not doing well on that. And that's not to say I'm perfect at all, but I have, sometimes I get very stuck because I like to do things in a way that I think is perfect. And you can't do that. You can't do that as a lawyer. You can't do that as a parent. You can't do that as a friend, you just can't. And letting go of that goal is, I think, a lifelong struggle for me, but something I'll keep working on. So a couple things in the book I read that really struck me. First of all, in chapter 1, there was this quote from someone that I really liked. was something along the lines of, in 20 years from now, you won't be disappointed by what you did do. You'll be more disappointed by what you didn't do. And that is, what did you give up? What did you decide not to do? Did you not spend enough time on the hobbies you really like? Did you not spend enough time traveling? Did you not spend enough time parenting? Did you not spend enough time petting your dog? I think it's really important at the start of your career, or maybe well into your career, like I am, to think about what really matters, and am I making time for those things on a daily basis, so that because we all know that life just sort of rolls by really quickly, and if we don't make the time for that, it's just not going to happen. Some other things that I found really interesting, in chapter 3, it talked about locus of control. Whether you have an external or internal locus of control. An internal locus of control basically means that you have that feeling that you're in control of your own life. Now, obviously, we don't have control over a lot of external factors, but we do have control over how we react, the choices that we make. And when you have a feeling of control, there's less stress in your life. And you feel at peace. So I think that's something that in some ways I have done well, but in some ways I'm still trying to figure out, like probably many people. And a big part of that is learning to say no, which I'm not very good at. I like to say yes, and I like to do a lot of different things. But I think every time you say yes or no, you have to decide, am I saying yes to something I really want to do that really supports my core values? And am I saying no to those things that don't? And, making good choices about the yeses and nos. A couple other things that I read that I think I really want to implement. One of them in chapter 6 talked a lot about ADD, and not ADD in the clinical sense, but ADD in the sense that most modern human beings have, and most modern lawyers have, which is that we're doing a lot of jumping around. The book used the term switch tasking, which I'd actually never heard. I've heard of multitasking, of course, but switch tasking, I really hadn't heard that term. And that's something I do a lot, switching between tasks all day long. Part of it's kind of inherent in my practice. My practice now is not where I sit down and write a brief for 5 hours. All day long, I have questions from clients that are coming in on my email, and they need answers right away. And when I come into work in the morning, I don't know what's going to be on my agenda. And so I do have to do a lot of switching. But it maybe is trained to my brain too much to like that switching. I like to switch a lot, and it's not very productive. So the book talked a lot about trying to figure out how to create bubbles where you can be really productive and you can focus on one issue, and then go back to to switch as you have to, but having some level of productivity. It talked about using a timer, which is interesting because I do that. In a typical day, I'll set a timer for 30 minutes and stay on one task for 30 minutes. And then at the end of that, I can evaluate whether I can switch to something else, but at least try to give myself these little bubbles of productivity. It's kind of interesting right now because if you're an employment lawyer, things are really crazy right now. There's a lot of new legislation, COVID legislation about leave law, and trying to learn that new information, trying to help clients who are trying to keep employees or being forced to lay them off. So right now I'm just living on my email, but try not to let my email be the control of my day. And that's a fine balance. I would be curious if any of you guys have any better answers to how you solve that problem. I don't know. It's very difficult. And as technology becomes a bigger part of our lives, I think it's going to become more difficult to not switch tasks and to really be focused. It's hard to even do a telephone call with a client and not look at your email. Does anyone else do that? Am I the only one? The dean smiled, so I'm going to take that as a yes, that maybe she does that occasionally. So how am I doing on time?
You have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. And, I think, I don't know if this is true or not, but just to bring the woman aspect back to this for a minute, people have always said that women are more multitaskers than men. I don't know what the evidence of that is, or if that's something we just choose to do, or if that's something that's sort of foisted upon us. But maybe we have even a bigger struggle as women with multitasking and switch tasking and not having the luxury of really getting to focus on one thing. I know one thing that happens to me in my day is I'm at work doing a lot of work, and then I have to answer emails from my kids' school, and I have to sign them up for a summer camp, and I have to fill out some form that their dance school wants. And so I also am always switching between being a lawyer and a parent all the time. And you don't have any choice about that. Those things have to be done. Maybe there's a better way to multitask, and still be productive. So I'm still a student in that regard. I'm still trying to learn how to do that. I think in many ways, these lessons are just as important for those of us who have been practicing for a long time as it is for people who are brand new. A lot of us who've been practicing for a while, we develop really bad habits. And, you have to figure out how to shake things up once in a while. And because the world is a little shooken up right now, I think it's a good time for us all to think about our goals, our priorities, how we're living our lives, how we're living our careers, where we need to make changes. And I'm certainly going to do that. And I think this book has been really helpful to, think about those, give myself a little bit of space to say it's okay to think about what I want and what I need to do in my career. So I've really enjoyed this book for that reason. Are you doing okay on time?
That was perfect.
Okay.
All right, our second panelist is Abby Dizon-Maughan. Abby, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, and thanks so much for this opportunity to be here with everyone this morning. I am not a technically advanced person, and so getting on and being able to participate in this is like a milestone for me, so thank you. I read, well, actually, I want to go to the Dean's point of being flexible with your path in this career. My story is that when I graduated from law school, I worked as a criminal defense attorney for 5 years. Immediately after graduating, my third year was spent at the Federal Defender's Office, and I thought that I had found my place. After 5 years of practice, I was called by Dick Burbidge, who was a former boss of mine. I was a paralegal at his firm before I had gone to law school, and he had offered me a job. Now, when I was in law school, I never thought that I was going to do civil litigation. I had worked for 10 years in civil litigation firms. I knew exactly what it was like to be a civil litigator because I had seen them practice day in, day out, and was part of the grind. And I never thought that that was part of my future. But when Dick Burbidge calls and he asks you, you don't say no to that type of opportunity. He's one of the best litigators that I've ever seen in court. He can capture the jury and the judge like I have never seen, and I couldn't miss that opportunity. But transitioning from the criminal world to the civil litigation world was very difficult for me. Obviously, it's a very different type of law, but it's also a different kind of mindset. When I was in my criminal practice, the relationship between prosecutors and defense attorneys was very close. We saw the same prosecutors day in, day out, different cases, different facts, different clients, but you start to build a type of rapport with your prosecutors. And it wasn't necessarily one that I have yet seen in the civil bar. And so it was really difficult. When civil litigation, day in, day out, you're told that you're just wrong by opposing counsel. And that can be really, really hard. So the lesson that I took from from this book is Lesson 25, Gaslighting at Work. Now, this chapter focuses particularly on gaslighting from superiors, but what I would like to talk about today is gaslighting among peers and contemporaries. That's not one thing that this author spoke about, but I think that it's as insidious as gaslighting from your managers, especially when you are transitioning from one field or one area of law to another, or you're still trying to find your path, your way on the path. We are particularly vulnerable to gaslighting. Now, if you don't know what gaslighting is, if you look on page 252 of what I'm looking at, the goal of gaslighters is to get their way by making the recipient question reality. Gaslighters distort the truth. And when you aren't necessarily sure about where you're going or if you're making the right decisions, that is something that you are, like I said, that gaslighters are, that you're particularly vulnerable to. And not only are we vulnerable to those actions, but I think that we as litigators, especially in an adversarial process, that we recognize and see the vulnerability in other people, and that we take advantages of those vulnerabilities. We have to in our practice. That's what we do. That's what we're paid for. This is what our clients are paying us to do. But I have seen in my practice, I have seen among my contemporaries and my peers that we sometimes tend to do that on a personal level. And where you work in a field where, I mean, it's a difficult place, right? It's not a profession that non-lawyers can necessarily empathize with. And so rather than cutting each other down, I think that what we need to do is support each other. We don't fall victim to gaslighting by not becoming a gaslighter ourselves. So that was one thing that really, really resonated with me. I'm fortunate enough to work in a firm where we're very small, and so we're very supportive of each other. But I've seen with my contemporaries who sometimes work at the bigger firms, or who feel a little bit more anonymous, that their contemporaries do that to them. It's really disheartening. My class too, when I was in law school, we're a larger class. I don't know, Dean, what your class numbers are, but we had 126, I think, in our graduating class. So I think it's larger than the classes that have been graduating recently. But even though we were relatively larger, we were closer to each other. We were all very supportive of each other. And that for me set the stage of how I wanted to practice in law. I wanted to make sure that people could rely on me, that they can talk to me, and that I had the same type of relationships with my classmates, that when things became difficult and you started to question your own capabilities and your accomplishments, that there was always somebody that you can turn to. And when we gaslight each other, that doesn't behoove any of us. It doesn't make us better litigators. It doesn't help us become better advocates for our clients. It really just, I think, compromises your own integrity. And the legal field here is very small, and we have a very long memory. And if you are ever wanting to become a judge or become rise up through the ranks, people remember that. And when you are applying for a judgeship, I've been told that they will contact your opposing counsel, and they'll contact your peers. And if you're mean to people, excuse me, people are not afraid to share that, especially when you're rising up through a powerful position. So don't gaslight. Let's be nice to each other, especially right now. We are in a difficult position where people are obviously struggling a little bit because of these lost connections that we have with each other. So I would encourage all of you to be supportive. We don't know what the legal profession is going to look like when we come out of this quarantine after the hit to our economy. So we've got to have each other's backs. So that's one of the lessons that I took from this. Excuse me. It's not COVID, I promise. I had the flu like a month ago, and I'm still recovering from the cough that is lingering from that. So I promise I'm okay. And I'm not contagious anymore. That leads me to lesson 44, which is connection through vulnerability. As lawyers, we are always taught to be strong, right? That you don't show your weaknesses, you don't show your hand, because people will prey on that because we're vulnerable when we show our weaknesses. I think, though, that really does us a disservice as attorneys on a personal level. Of course, you don't want to reveal the weaknesses in your case because you don't want your client or your clients to be exploited for that. But there are days where you just don't know what you're doing, right? I graduated in 12. I have been in civil litigation for 2.5 years, and there are still days where I think, what am I doing? You know, I come across terms and fact patterns and cases where I'm not really sure what they're saying. And so I use Google a lot. And I also use my friends. I also use people who are far smarter than I am. I think that's one of my favorite things about being an attorney is that we are surrounded by incredibly intelligent people. And it behooves us and it behooves our clients to learn from each other. And the best way that I think that we can learn from each other is just opening up and saying, listen, I don't get this. I read this case, I know what the holding says, but I'm not really sure how they got there. Or I'm here in this firm and this is my position and I'm not really sure if I'm loving it. How am I, help me figure out where my footing is. Reassure me, answer my questions. And I think that if we did that for each other, we help strengthen each other and we help strengthen the profession. And by doing that, we lend a lot of credibility to what we do, especially when people are who don't have access to the system, by showing that we are stronger together as attorneys. People who don't necessarily have access to or are not actively involved in the system start to believe that we are credible, that we are not the skeezy attorneys that they see on TV. We're not Saul Goodman. So that's my 2 cents, and I think that's my 10 minutes.
Great, thank you so much. That was incredibly helpful. Okay, so we have a question, and just a reminder, if you have a question of our panelists, please use the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. Our first question comes from an anonymous attendee, and the question is, have you ever been accused of putting your career before your family, and how did you respond?
All the time.
I was thinking the same thing.
Oh, Dean, I think you muted yourself.
There we go.
There you go.
Sorry. I was going to say, I don't think I've ever been accused to my face, but I'm sure it's happening behind my back all the time. Does anybody want to tackle that question first?
Yeah, I once worked with a man who would, if women worked, would say, they really shouldn't be doing that. If they had children, that they should be taking care of their children. And he would say how great his wife was because she stayed home and took care of their children. And he would make really inappropriate remarks. I'd say the first thing is you have to know internally and be comfortable with your own choices. Mm-hmm. If you know that you're a good mother and you're a good lawyer and you're doing your best, other people's choices and other people's opinions about that don't matter. And sometimes we don't feel comfortable completely with our own choices. On any particular day, sometimes I'm a better mother and work is suffering, and on other days I'm a better lawyer and mothering suffering. So, it's not like it's just always constant. we're always trying to recalibrate. But other people have opinions. You can't change what they think about the world. And I guess they're entitled to their opinions. I think they should also keep them to themselves. But that being said, you also need to be comfortable with your own choices, but also stick up for other women. If I hear that being said about other women, or other men, I will stick up for them and say, you have no idea what their life is. You don't know what choices they've made. Everyone's doing their best.
I have a really quick story to tell. This is from my past life as a criminal defense attorney, and I was in one of the outlying jurisdictions waiting for my turn to get called to the podium, and I was in the anteroom with one of the bailiffs, and he looked at me and he said, "Are you a lawyer?" I said, "Yep, I'm a lawyer." And he said, "Well, this is just fine and good until you have kids." Now, at the time, my youngest, who's now 5, she was maybe 8 or 9 months old. And he said, your place is in the home raising your kids. And this was probably several months after some really horrific allegations came out of a mother who was passed out. She had done a bunch of drugs, passed out in another room, and several men raped her very young daughter. That's what's going to happen to your kids if you keep working. And I looked at him and I said, I have kids. I have a boy and I have a little girl. And that's not going to happen to them because I'm not a drug addict. And what is going to happen to them is that I'm teaching my son not to be afraid of strong women. And I'm teaching my daughter to become a strong woman. And he just didn't know what to say. He left the room. But when stuff like that happens, it's very jarring. But Christina's right. Know who you are. Be comfortable with the choices that you're making. And if you aren't, find support. Find people who can support you and hold you up. Because there are people in this community who do that for each other. So don't fall victim to the gaslighting.
I love that, although what a horrific story, but some really good advice there. I would just add in one thing that's been really helpful for me is having a partner who is comfortable and willing to take on an increased domestic load. So the reason I'm able to do what I do is because I have an amazing partner who has taken on an increased burden on the domestic side. And so I once heard somebody say that one of the most important choices you make in your career is your choice of partner. If you want to have a partner, that's not to say you have to have a partner, but if you choose to have a partner, your choice of partner is really important because your partner can either lift you up, and I think I've been really fortunate to have a partner who views my success as our success and is so willing to invest in me, or you can have a partner who kind of tears you down. I've certainly had women in my life who have talked about how their partner was really threatened by their success and threatened by them going to law school, uncomfortable taking on additional responsibilities at home. So I think for those of you who either don't have partners or who are newly in a relationship, or even if you've been in a relationship for a while, it's never a bad idea, like Christina was saying, to recalibrate, to have those blunt conversations. And I think it's really important to have blunt conversations about what you want to do and what they're honestly willing to do and what they're not willing to do. And so I think that's something that's been really helpful in my career is having a partner who's willing to support and comfortable supporting. All right. So here's another question from an anonymous attendee. How has the legal field changed for women over the years?
I'm not sure if it's changed a lot. I've only practiced in Utah, so that's my only experience. So that's all I can speak to. And I think there are still a lot of challenges. I think there are a lot of great things. I think I guess I've seen one thing that's changed. I think Women Lawyers of Utah, that group has become stronger and stronger and has worked harder to help women, for example, mentor women to get into judgeships, mentor women to, rise in the field that they're in. So I guess that has been one change. And it's really critical, whether you're involved in Women Lawyers of Utah or you just find a group of women or men in your own life that can really support you. At my firm, there's a good group of women, and I always think we need to do more, but we're trying to support each other, and it's really critical. And as you get more senior, it's critical for you to be that person. And you actually, even when you start out, you can be that person. There's always someone that's junior to you. If you're just graduating from law school, there's someone who's starting law school, and you can mentor them. You don't have to wait till you're 25 years out to be a mentor. Always take that opportunity to help another woman along. And in my experience, you get more in return than you give. I can't even tell you how many times I've mentored a woman, and then she's become really powerful and amazing and has been able to pay it back. So, I mean, you don't do it for that reason, but it is really amazing how that comes back to you. So, I mean, things are changing. We have to be the change. We have to insist on change. In every workplace, you have to make sure that you're letting the powers that be know that it's important for women to be included, for them to be promoted, for them to be accepted. And we just got to make that happen every day. Change can be very slow, but it will happen.
Yeah, and be prepared to answer the call. The number of people who participate in bar activities as in leadership capacities is very small. It's a very shallow. We get tired after a while because it's a very tiring position to be in. So be ready to answer the call. That's how I think that how it's changing for women. I think when I was an ex officio with the Bar Commission, that it was over half women at the time, which is phenomenal. It's great because women's issues were brought to the forefront. And there are so many opportunities that where you can serve in a leadership position to effectuate change. So be ready to step up when somebody calls you. You don't have to say yes to everything because you will get burned out if you say yes to everything. So know when to say no, but also know when it's time to take up the gauntlet and fight the fight, because honestly, we get tired after a while, and we need to start taking a step back. So be ready to do that.
And I would just add one thing I've noticed. So when I first started my career, I like to say that all of my professional problems have been with senior women. And I think the way that, the reason that happens is because when I started, there was this mentality, it was hard for me, so it should be hard for you. And I think that still happens. You still hear of people out there who kind of have that mentality. But I will say, going back to Abby's point earlier about vulnerability, I do feel like people today are more willing to admit their vulnerabilities and willing to ask for help than they were when I started. And that could have been a product of where I started. I was at a big firm in Washington, D.C. But I do see that more and more. So for example, even right now with this COVID-19 crisis, I see people saying, this is really hard. It's hard for me from a mental health perspective. It's hard for me, speaking personally, it's been very difficult to try to find time to both take care of my son or to keep him off of Zoom calls and also get work done. So, these are hard times. And I think in the past, a lot of women would just want to say, no, it's fine. I've got it. It's all taken care of without admitting those vulnerabilities. And so I feel like people are more willing to ask for help and share when they're struggling, or that could perhaps be a product of the Salt Lake City Bar, which is a wonderfully collegial bar. But that's something I feel like I've noticed in my career. All right, let's look for our next question. The next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Do you think there has been an increased respect for male counterparts with the growth of women lawyers?
Repeat that question, please.
Do you think there has been increased respect for male counterparts with the growth of women lawyers? Do you think men respect us more because there are more of us, is how I interpret that question.
Oh. Christina, I'll let you take the first stab at that.
Yeah, I'll say yes. I think the more there are women doing everything, the more it normalizes, right? You have women in the Senate, you have women in the Congress, you have women who are presidents of countries, you have more women in law firms, you have more women at legal aid. Then it starts to seem like a normal thing, not just like, oh, well, that's some unusual, strange thing. So I think it does help. It doesn't solve all problems, but
Right.
I think would say it certainly helps.
See, in my perspective, it's just a little bit different, and I don't know if that's because it's coming from the perspective of a minority female, but I still feel like there is a lot of the struggle. How do I say this without sounding like a crybaby victim? There are still times where I go to depositions and male attorneys ask if I'm the court reporter. When I was in my criminal practice, I'd go to court and people would ask me if I was the defendant. I've been asked if I was the interpreter. I have a ton of stories from my prior life as a criminal defense attorney, but I was in one of the district courts and two of my clients were males, Arabic speaking. One of them spoke just a tiny bit of English, but I could tell that they were getting frustrated because we were 2 hours after our scheduled court appearance and we still hadn't been called, and it's because the court interpreter hadn't shown up yet. There's like one Arabic court interpreter for Salt Lake County, and he apparently was super busy that day. So I'm trying to explain this to my clients in English because I only speak English, and the prosecutor came out of his office and said, they're represented. And I said, oh, I know, I'm their attorney. And he goes, oh, I thought you were the court interpreter. And I looked at him and I said, I'm speaking English to him. Why would you assume that I'm the interpreter? I'm struggling to even communicate with my clients. And so it's those types of experiences for me that makes me hesitate a little bit. And like I said, it's coming from a different perspective. Has there been an increase in respect? Sure, I think that generally, but there are still those instances of microaggressions that make me think we've got a long way to go, and there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the answer is yes and no, at least based on my own experience. So there's certainly been some areas that have improved, that I've noticed have improved since I've been practicing. A good example of that is breastfeeding. So when I started practicing, about 20 years ago now, time flies. Nobody talked about breastfeeding. Nobody pumped at work. There was no nursing facilities or anything that you could use. But nowadays, I think that's changed at a lot of workplaces. I know at the law school, I'm really proud that we have nursing rooms on every floor, and we have refrigerators available to nursing mothers, and we have family spaces. So I feel like that's an area where we've made some positive impact by virtue of having more of us in the profession, that you now have politicians who are breastfeeding on the floor of parliaments and legislatures. So that's definitely an area where having more representation I've seen in my time has improved. But at the same time, I can't tell you how many comments I've gotten since I was fortunate to become dean here of, oh, you're a woman, and oh, you're the first woman, and oh, you're so young. So those comments are still there, those thought processes are still there. So I think it seems like since I started practicing, we've made some progress, but there's still some progress to be made. All right, let's look for our next question. All right. Next question from an anonymous attendee. What can male members of the bar who don't want to be part of the problems women face as lawyers do to be better?
Listen. I think that's the most important thing that our partners can do is listen. Just listen and don't try to fix it. Recognize that it's our narrative to tell, and that we need sometimes a safe space to do that and support. That's the best thing that our partners and allies can do for us is just listen.
I would just say, treat women just like you do your male partners, just treat them like capable, competent lawyers and be there to support them. I've had a couple of interesting experiences. I have one lawyer in my firm who's been a great mentor to me, a male, has given me a lot of opportunities. And one really interesting thing about him, his wife was a lawyer, but I think he really, really got it when his daughter became a lawyer. And his daughter had children, and she was trying to do the parent thing and the lawyer thing. And for some reason, for the first time, he really, really, even though he'd been a great mentor, but he really understood that. And he would talk to me, they need to have more part-time positions, and, they need to be more accommodating to mothers. My daughter's wonderful, but she can't, she can't work these hours they want her to do. And he was also being like the grandpa babysitter. So he got to see it in a completely different way. It was a really amazing experience. I've seen that with a number of men. But, it's kind of been interesting during this work at home period to see that, the men who also have these issues. A lot of my Zoom conferences now start with every lawyer on the line saying, sorry, I'm at home, I have these kids and these dogs, and the men are doing it, which I think is so great. The men are saying, yeah, sorry, I have my 2-year-old and my 5-year-old, and my wife's working right now, so I'll do my best on this call, but I might get interrupted. And I think that's wonderful that, we all have these struggles, right?
Yep.
It's been an interesting experience.
I would add with jump in with a concrete example. Take paternity leave. So more and more, not just because it's good for you, but also a lot of law firms and organizations and governments are offering paternity leave. And if men take paternity leave, and if men take the full amount of paternity leave, then women will feel like they can too. So I've spoken to some of our recent male graduates at the college or from the College of Law, and they were telling me of how the women in their law firms were really pushing them to take the full amount of paternity leave, because if the men are doing it, then the women felt more comfortable to do it. So I think that's a really concrete example of how men can support. And then the other example is don't make assumptions. And I actually find this hard to do this myself, because I'll know colleagues who have families and who are caregivers. And so I might presume that they aren't able to take on an opportunity, but let them make that choice. Still ask them just like you would ask anybody else, and don't presume that, if they're caregivers for their parents or caregivers for children, that they can't do it. Let them decide just like you would anybody else. And sometimes that could be hard. I find myself falling into that trap, but try to do that wherever you can. All right, so let's look to our next question. All right, we have a question from Jane Marquardt. So Jane asks, more of a comment than a question. Abby's observation on being asked if she was the court reporter, etc. Not good that it is still happening. But when I started practicing 43 years ago, that was almost always the response I got from people. So things are getting better. Thoughts on that?
I think it's great. I do. I think it's great that it's getting better. And those types of instances, while they do happen, are few and far between. But I think the best part of when those things do happen is that we have the support of each other. I remember the first time it happened when I went to court, I was able to text somebody that I had met through WLU and recounted my story. And I said, what do I need to do? What do I say? And she was there to support me, because it's very destabilizing experience. So I'm glad that it's getting better. And I'm really happy that we have such a wide network of support here in the Valley.
And if it happens to you, you know, that person may not have any ill will. They just may be making some very wrong assumptions. And I say, just say to them, oh gosh, I thought you were the court reporter. I guess we don't have a court reporter.
It is true. Sometimes just a one comment will, without having to shine a spotlight on it, will accomplish the goal without having to be controversial. But Jane, I think in my experience, you're absolutely right. Again, I've had more limited experience than you have, but I've certainly seen some improvement in the profession since starting, and hopefully we continue on an upward trajectory. And really glad to see that you are on the call. So thanks for joining us, Jane. Okay, I think we have time. Well, actually, no. Let's see, our next question comes from Victoria Vincent. Hello, Victoria. It's good to see that you are on. And Victoria asks, what advice would you give towards finding a woman mentor in the legal field?
Well, when I was in my criminal practice, I found my mentors by going to court. I would encounter other women who I just admired. I liked the way that they presented themselves in court. I liked the way that they held themselves up. And so as awkward as it is, I would just walk up to them after court and say, you don't know who I am. You have no idea who I am. I think you're awesome. Can I take you to lunch? And try to build a relationship that way. In my civil practice, because I'm more in my office than I am in court, it's been a little bit more difficult. But we still have opposing counsel who are women, and I'll do the same thing. If I see them, or if I see their pleadings that come across and I think, well, this is really well done, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, let's go to lunch, let's meet up, let's go for a drink. I'd like to learn from you.
Yeah, I agree with that. You have to be really proactive. You have to look everywhere in your world. Maybe you have to look beyond your own workplace. There may be one in your workplace, but there may not be. You have to look everywhere, and don't be afraid to do exactly what Abby said. Go up and ask someone to go to lunch. At least for me, I'm thrilled when people ask me to do that. I'm happy to help. Happy to be a mentor to whatever degree I can. I mean, beyond that, obviously those relationships grow or they don't grow. There's a natural process to it, but you've got to be willing to be, to reach out and be the person looking for someone.
And be persistent. We have to recognize that we're all really busy in our practice and in our personal lives, and sometimes we have a hard enough time juggling those two things, but it may take us months to get back to you, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to be a part of that relationship. So just be persistent. I know that I've not been the best about getting back to emails or text messages, but I promise it's not because I'm trying to blow you off. It's just because stuff happens. So keep bugging us, and we'll eventually get to lunch, especially after this quarantine is over.
Yes, absolutely. And Victoria, I would just jump in with, you see somebody you think is cool, you see somebody you want to get to know better, just reach out to them. So myself, I've seen some really awesome female deans that I admired, and I'll just go up to them and be like, I want you to be my friends. I want to learn from you. And people have, in my experience, have always been super excited to talk and to share their wisdom. So yeah, just keep on reaching out, Victoria. Glad you asked that question. All right, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, the last question is from an anonymous attendee. What advice do you have for women working as summer associates and early year associates with regard to building relationships and getting work?
Well, first of all, the most important thing is just to do a good job. You have to work hard and do a good job. But, have lots of conversations with people. Go to all the social things that your workplace has to offer. Take people to lunch. Again, I love it when summer associates ask me to go to lunch. You can't sit around waiting for someone to ask you. Ask people to lunch. Ask people if you can have a 15-minute conversation with them when they have time. Get to know people personally. Ask about their personal lives. That's what you do. You just build relationships. It's so critical. And, also asking for work. If you want to work with someone in particular in your workplace, you think they're great, go to them and say, I would really love to work on a project with you. When you have something come up, would you please keep me in mind? They probably will.
I echo everything that Christina said.
Yeah, and I would just add or I guess emphasize, because Christina said it, just do your work and do it well, because people want to work with people who get things done, who have a good reputation for getting things done. And so starting and protecting that reputation is really important as you're starting your career, and then would echo everything else that has already been said.
And don't be afraid to ask questions either. If you don't understand the project, ask the questions. There's nothing worse than getting something from somebody where they're all gung-ho about it and they're really ambitious, but they missed the mark by a mile, where that could have been taken care of in a half-hour conversation. Let's walk through the issues together. Let's direct you a little bit more. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. Nobody's going to think you're dumb. We have partners who are still asking each other questions, because the law is a dynamic, moving, breathing, living animal, and it changes all, and nobody can ever be expected to know everything about the law. So ask questions.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's great advice. When I was a summer associate and early in my career, I would send an email after I got an assignment from a partner. I would send an email to the partner saying, my understanding is you need me to do X, and then explain what my understanding was, just to confirm that I understood it correctly and that they understood what they had assigned me. Because sometimes you get so busy with your work, you might forget what you asked somebody to do, or what specifically you wanted them to research. So I found that as a really helpful tool, both to make sure that my understanding was correct and I was doing the right thing, and to kind of gently remind the partner of what they had asked me to do, because sometimes that would get lost or forgotten. So. Well, I want to thank our panelists. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our time. This was just an incredible discussion. I know I learned a lot. I really appreciate everybody attending our first book review. As I mentioned earlier, I'm hopeful that this will be the first of many such book reviews, so we have this opportunity to have this conversation as a community. I hope you were all well. These are difficult and trying times. So if there's anything we can do at the S.J. Quinney College of Law to support you, please let us know. I think you heard from our panelists that there's no shame in reaching out, and we're here to support you. And also, I hope that you'll be able to join us for our next book review. And again, a big thank you to our two panelists. Thank you so much for a wonderful panel. I hope everybody has a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.